The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, and for once, it wasn't my fault. Victoria Whitmore, my mother-in-law, stood frozen in her Chanel suit, her perfectly manicured hand still suspended in midair where the glass had slipped from her fingers. The sound echoed through the grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate, where 200 of society's elite had gathered for what was supposed to be another evening of me being reminded exactly where I didn't belong. But tonight was different. Tonight, I held a document that would change everything. The antique chandelier above us caught the light, casting prismatic rainbows across Victoria's pale face as she stared at the papers in my hand. Papers that proved I wasn't just the girl from the wrong side of town who had somehow tricked her precious son into marriage. Papers that revealed a truth so devastating to everything the Whitmore family stood for that even now, watching them process it, I could hardly believe it myself. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, like no matter what you do, you'll never be good enough for certain people, then you need to hear what happened to me. Because sometimes the universe has a way of revealing that the people who look down on you are standing on foundations built from sand. Before I tell you everything, if stories about underdogs getting their ultimate vindication inspire you, please take a moment to follow this channel, because what I'm about to share will show you that sometimes the best revenge isn't planned. Sometimes it's inherited. My name is Emma, though for the past 3 years, the Whitmore family has had plenty of other names for me. Gold digger, social climber, that girl, never daughter-in-law, never family, and certainly never Emma Whitmore, despite the marriage certificate that legally bound me to their precious son, James. James and I met at a bookstore, of all places. I was working there part-time while finishing my degree in social work, a degree his family would later mock as quaint and hardly profitable. He was hiding from a blind date his mother had arranged with the daughter of some pharmaceutical heiress. We bonded over our mutual love of first edition mysteries and terrible coffee from the shop's ancient machine. He didn't tell me about his family's wealth until our 5th date, and by then, I was already in love with the man who quoted Neruda and brought me wildflowers he'd picked himself from Central Park. The Whitmores owned half of Manhattan's luxury real estate. James's father, Richard, had inherited the business from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. Old money, the kind that came with membership to clubs that didn't advertise, and surnames that opened doors before you even knocked. Victoria came from similar stock, the Ashford shipping fortune, and together they ruled their social circle with the kind of quiet power that didn't need to raise its voice to destroy you. The first time James brought me to meet them, I wore my best dress, a navy blue thing I'd bought on sale at Nordstrom Rack that I thought looked sophisticated. Victoria's eyes had swept over me like a scanner at airport security, cataloging every wrong detail. The dress was polyester blend, not silk. My shoes were last season. My handbag was clearly a knockoff, though it wasn't. It was just from Target. But the worst offense, the one that sealed my fate before I'd even opened my mouth, was my last name, Rodriguez. How interesting, Victoria had said, drawing out the word like she was examining something unpleasant under a microscope. And where did you say your family was from, dear? The Bronx, I'd answered honestly, not yet understanding that honesty was a luxury I couldn't afford in their world. My parents run a small restaurant there. The temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. Richard hadn't even looked up from his Wall Street Journal. James's younger brother, Harrison, had actually snorted into his whiskey. And his sister, Catherine, had exchanged a look with her mother that said everything. This won't last, but it did last. James loved me with the kind of fierce devotion that made him stand up to his family for the first time in his 30 years. We married 18 months later in a small ceremony that the Whitmores attended with the enthusiasm of people attending a tax audit. Victoria wore black. Richard left after the cocktail hour. Catherine spent the entire reception on her phone, and Harrison got drunk and made a toast about how, at least the prenup is ironclad. The prenup. God, the prenup. 47 pages of legal documentation essentially stating that if James and I divorced, I would leave with exactly what I'd brought in. Nothing. I'd signed it without hesitation because I wasn't marrying James for money. I was marrying him because he was the only person who'd ever made me feel like I was enough exactly as I was. Or so I thought, until the reality of being a Whitmore wife set in. Every family dinner was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Victoria would seat me at the far end of the table, always next to Great Aunt Millicent, who was deaf in one ear and only spoke about her cats. She'd introduce me at parties as James's wife with a tone that suggested this was a temporary affliction, like a cold he'd eventually get over. When I'd offer to help with charity events, I had experience from volunteering throughout college, she'd pat my hand condescendingly and say, "That's sweet, dear, but these things require a certain understanding of how things are done." The worst part was how they did it all with smiles. In public, Victoria would air-kiss my cheeks and call me darling. But in private, the mask would slip. I'll never forget the Thanksgiving when I'd spent 3 days preparing my grandmother's mole recipe, wanting to contribute something meaningful to the family meal. Victoria had taken one look at the dish and said, "How ethnic. We'll put it on the side table with the rolls." It was never served. I found it later, untouched, scraped into the garbage. Harrison was more direct in his cruelty. He'd make jokes about me being James's midlife crisis, even though James was only 32. He'd ask if I needed money for the family back home, with a smirk that made it clear he thought my parents were undocumented, which they weren't. He once brought his girlfriend to dinner, a senator's daughter named Brittany, and spent the entire evening comparing us. "Brittany went to Yale," he'd say. "Where did you go again, Emma? City College?" "Hunter College," I'd correct him for the 100th time, but it didn't matter. To them, any school that didn't cost 6 figures a year might as well have been a community center offering night classes. Catherine was perhaps the cruelest because she pretended to be my friend. She'd take me shopping, insisting on Bond Street boutiques where a single handbag cost more than my parents made in a month. When I'd hesitate at the prices, she'd laugh that tinkling laugh of hers and say, "Oh, Emma, don't worry. James can afford it. That's why you married him, isn't it?" Then she'd buy 3 bags and parade them in front of me, knowing I couldn't afford even one without James's credit card, which I refused to use for personal things. She'd invite me to her book club, where all the women had hyphenated last names and spoke about their humanitarian trips to Africa between discussions of wine vintages. When I'd try to contribute to the conversation about the actual book, Catherine would interrupt with, "That's such an interesting perspective, Emma. So authentic. Girls, isn't it refreshing to hear from someone who's actually struggled?" But the deepest cuts came from the staff. The Whitmores employed a small army of people to maintain their various properties, and Victoria had made it clear to them exactly where I ranked in the hierarchy. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, would forget to clean the room James and I used when we stayed over. The cook would mysteriously run out of ingredients whenever I offered to make something. Even the gardener would ignore my requests, once letting my small herb garden, the only thing I'd asked for, die while meticulously maintaining Victoria's prized orchids. James tried to shield me from it, but he'd been raised in that bubble of privilege where he couldn't quite see the 1,000 small cuts his family inflicted. "They just need time to warm up to you," he'd say after another disastrous family dinner. Mother's always been particular about these things. Particular. That was one word for it. Another would be bigoted, classist, cruel. The breaking point came at the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala, their biggest social event of the year. 400 guests, $1 million raised for charity, and me in a borrowed dress because Victoria had forgotten to mention the event was black tie until the day before. She'd seated me at table 12, the Siberia of the seating chart, with the accountants and distant cousins no one really talked to. James was at the head table, of course, because he was a Whitmore. I was not. During Victoria's speech about the importance of helping the less fortunate, she actually used me as an example. "We must remember," she'd said, her voice carrying across the ballroom, "that not everyone has had our advantages. Why, even in our own family, we've welcomed those from humbler backgrounds." Her eyes had found me in the crowd, and 400 heads turned to stare. It's our duty to lift others up, even when it's challenging. The applause was thunderous. I sat there, my cheeks burning, as people at my table avoided eye contact. One woman actually patted my hand sympathetically, like I was a charity case who'd won a lottery ticket by marrying James. That night, I told James I couldn't do it anymore. We fought, our first real fight. He accused me of being too sensitive, of not trying hard enough to fit in. I accused him of being blind to his family's treatment of me. He said I was imagining things. I said he was choosing them over me. He said that wasn't fair. I said none of this was fair. We went to bed angry, and I spent the night staring at the ceiling, wondering if love was enough when everything else was stacked against you. Maybe the Whitmores were right. Maybe I would never be one of them. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could exist in their world without losing pieces of myself every single day. The next morning, a lawyer showed up at our apartment. Not a divorce lawyer, though that's what I assumed when James answered the door at 7 a.m. to find a stern-looking man in a three-piece suit holding a briefcase. My heart dropped to my stomach. Had Victoria finally convinced James to leave me? Was this how rich people ended marriages, with lawyers at dawn and checks written in conference rooms? But the lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, wasn't there for James. He was there for me. "Mrs. Emma Whitmore?" he'd asked, and it was the first time anyone had used my married name with actual respect. "Formerly Emma Rodriguez?" I nodded, clutching my coffee mug like a lifeline while James stood beside me, equally confused. "I'm here regarding the estate of Lucia Rodriguez. My grandmother, my beautiful, fierce abuela who had passed away 6 months ago. The family matriarch who'd raised me while my parents worked 18-hour days to keep their restaurant afloat. The woman who'd taught me to be proud of where I came from, even when the world told me I should be ashamed." "Lucia Rodriguez passed away 6 months ago," I said, my voice tight. "The estate was settled. She left her house to my parents, and her jewelry to me." The jewelry? That Victoria had called costume pieces when she'd seen me wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace. Mr. Pemberton adjusted his glasses. "I'm afraid there's been a development. Your grandmother had additional assets that were held in trust, with specific instructions for their distribution." James and I exchanged glances. "Additional assets?" My grandmother had been a seamstress. She'd worked in factories in the garment district for 40 years, taking in alterations on the side to make ends meet. What additional assets could she possibly have had? Mr. Pemberton opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Mrs. Rodriguez, are you familiar with the name Alejandro Herrera?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Alejandro Herrera, the fashion designer, the legend, the man who'd built an empire from a single shop in Barcelona and turned it into one of the most exclusive luxury brands in the world. Every piece was handmade, every design a work of art. Victoria owned several Herrera pieces. She'd shown them off at every opportunity, talking about how impossible they were to acquire, how there were waiting lists years long. "Everyone knows who Alejandro Herrera is," James said when I remained silent. "But what does he have to do with Emma's grandmother?" Mr. Pemberton pulled out a photograph, black and white, edges yellowed with age. Two people stood in front of a small shop, their arms around each other, smiling at the camera with the kind of joy that transcends time. The woman was unmistakably my grandmother, young and radiant. The man beside her, "That's Alejandro Herrera," I whispered, my hands shaking as I took the photo, "with my grandmother. They were married," Mr. Pemberton said simply, "secretly in 1959. Your grandmother was already engaged to another man, an arrangement made by her family, but she and Alejandro had fallen in love while she was apprenticing at a fashion house in Barcelona. They married in a small church outside the city with only 2 witnesses. My mind was spinning. My grandmother had never mentioned any of this. She'd married my grandfather, Jose Rodriguez, in 1960. They'd been together until he died when I was 5. She'd never remarried, never even dated. How could she have been married to someone else? The marriage was annulled, Mr. Pemberton continued, under pressure from both families. Your grandmother returned to New York and married Jose Rodriguez as planned. Alejandro stayed in Spain and built his empire, but they never forgot each other. He pulled out another document, this one newer, official looking. When Alejandro Herrera died 3 years ago, he left something in trust for your grandmother. She was to receive it only if she outlived him, and if she didn't, it would pass to her direct descendants. She knew about it but chose never to claim it while she was alive. Why? I asked, though I thought I knew. Pride. My grandmother had so much pride. She would never have wanted anyone to think she was taking charity from an old lover. According to the letter she left with her will, a letter that was only to be opened if this situation arose, she wanted you to have what she felt she couldn't accept. She wanted you to have the choice she never had. James leaned forward. What exactly did Herrera leave her? Mr. Pemberton pulled out another document. 49% of Herrera International, current market value, approximately $2.3 billion. The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the hardwood floor. Coffee spread across the wood like a dark lake, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. That's impossible, James said, his voice strangled. Herrera International is worth, the company is controlled by a board of directors who own 51%, Mr. Pemberton finished. The other 49% was Alejandro's personal stake, which he never sold, never diluted. He left it all to Lucia Rodriguez, the woman he called his true wife in his private papers. And now, Mrs. Whitmore, it belongs to you. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor myself to reality. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. My grandmother had been a seamstress. She'd darned socks and hemmed pants and made my school uniforms by hand because we couldn't afford to buy them. She couldn't have been sitting on billions of dollars. It didn't make sense. But then I remembered things. Small things that hadn't seemed significant at the time. The way she'd run her fingers over fabric in stores, murmuring about quality and construction in Spanish. The sketches I'd found in her things after she died. Beautiful, intricate designs for dresses that looked like they belonged in museums. The way she'd watched fashion shows on television with an intensity that seemed deeper than casual interest, occasionally muttering, "He would have done it differently." "There's more," Mr. Pemberton said, pulling out yet another folder. Alejandro Herrera owned several properties that are also now yours. A villa in Barcelona, an apartment in Paris, a house in Milan, and, he paused, pulling out a deed, a brownstone on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. My heart stopped. "What's the address?" He read it off, and James gasped. I didn't recognize it, but clearly he did. That's 3 blocks from my parents' house," he said slowly. "That brownstone has been empty for 20 years. People have tried to buy it, but the owner always refused to sell. My mother tried to buy it 5 years ago for Catherine. She offered double the market value." "The owner was Alejandro Herrera," Mr. Pemberton confirmed. "He bought it in 1985. According to the records, he used to stay there whenever he was in New York. The house has been maintained by a service all these years, waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked. "Mr. Pemberton pulled out one last item, a letter sealed with wax. "For you, apparently. This is to be given to you with the deed." I broke the seal with trembling fingers. The letter was written in elegant script, in Spanish. My grandmother had taught me Spanish, insisting I needed to know my language, our language. I translated as I read aloud, To the granddaughter of my beloved Lucia, if you are reading this, then my greatest wish has come true, that Lucia's line continues, and that what I built can finally return to where it always belonged. I loved your grandmother from the moment I met her in 1958 until the moment I drew my last breath. Every dress I designed, I imagined her wearing. Every success I achieved, I wished I could share with her. We had 3 days as husband and wife before the world tore us apart. 3 days that I treasured for 60 years. She chose duty and family over love, and I understood. I respected her choice, even as it broke my heart. But I never stopped hoping that someday, somehow, our families would be joined again. What I leave to you is not just money or property. It is the dream of a man who loved a woman across oceans and decades. Use it to be free in ways she never could be. Use it to choose love over duty, happiness over expectation, yourself over what others think you should be. Your grandmother was the bravest woman I ever knew. She gave up everything for her family. But you, her granddaughter, should give up nothing. Take what is yours and live the life she and I could never have. With all my hope for your happiness, Alejandro Herrera. I was crying by the time I finished reading. James had his arm around me, and even Mr. Pemberton looked moved. But through my tears, a strange calm was settling over me. My grandmother's final gift wasn't just money, it was vindication, it was freedom. It was the ability to look the Whitmores in the eye and know that I was not less than them. I was more than they could ever imagine. There is one more thing, Mr. Pemberton said softly. Alejandro Herrera's personal collection. The designs he never sold, the pieces he created but kept private. They're in a vault in Barcelona. There are over 300 original pieces. The fashion world doesn't even know they exist. They're yours now too. The board of directors at Herrera International has been waiting to meet with you. As the largest single shareholder, you have significant say in the company's direction. James was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Emma, you're one of the richest women in New York, in the world. You own more than my entire family combined. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Whitmores, with all their real estate and old money, were worth perhaps $500 million. Impressive by any standard. But I now controlled assets worth nearly 5 times that. The girl from the Bronx, the one who would never be one of us, was now wealthier than all of them. When do I need to sign the papers? I asked Mr. Pemberton. Everything has been prepared. If you could come to our offices tomorrow, we can finalize the transfer. After that, we'll need to schedule meetings with the board, deal with the properties, and discuss the tax implications. Tomorrow, I agreed, my mind already racing. What time? Would 10 a.m. work? Perfect. After Mr. Pemberton left, James and I sat in silence for a long time. The coffee was still spreading across the floor, but neither of us moved to clean it up. Finally, James spoke. This changes everything. Does it? I asked, looking at him carefully. Does it change how you see me? He turned to face me fully, taking my hands in his. No, you're still Emma. You're still the woman who quotes poetry and cries at dog food commercials and makes the best empanadas I've ever had. But Emma, this changes how my family will see you. I don't care how they see me anymore, I said, and realized it was true. I spent 3 years trying to earn their approval, to prove I was worthy of you, of them. But I was always worthy. I just needed to believe it myself. James pulled me close. What are you going to do? I thought about it. I could take the money and run. James and I could leave New York, leave his family, start fresh somewhere else. But that felt like letting them win. They'd driven me to the edge, made me doubt myself, my worth, my place in the world. Running away would be admitting they were right, that I didn't belong. I'm going to the foundation gala, I said suddenly. James pulled back, confused. What? That was last week. No, the spring gala, the one your mother is planning now, the biggest one of the year. the one where she always announces the family's charitable donations and everyone fawns over how generous the Whitmores are. Understanding dawned in James's eyes. Emma. She wants to treat me like a charity case. Fine. Let's see how she handles it when the charity case becomes the biggest donor in the room. The next 3 months were the strangest of my life. I signed the papers, met with the board of directors, and quietly took control of my inheritance. I didn't tell anyone except James, and I made him promise not to tell his family. It wasn't hard to keep the secret. The Whitmores never asked about my life anyway. To them, I was still the same embarrassment, the same mistake their son had made. Victoria continued her campaign of subtle humiliation. At the Easter brunch, she gave everyone monogrammed Hermes scarves except me. I got a gift card to Target because I know you like to shop there. At Catherine's birthday dinner, she told the story of how James and I met, emphasizing that I'd been working retail like it was the most shameful thing imaginable. Harrison made his usual jokes about my background, and Richard continued to act like I didn't exist. But now, instead of hurt, I felt only anticipation. Every slight, every insult, every moment of condescension was just adding fuel to the fire of what was coming. I started working with the Herrera board, learning about the company my grandmother's true love had built. I visited the properties, quietly, privately. The brownstone on the Upper East Side was magnificent, frozen in time but perfectly preserved. I had it quietly renovated, preparing it for what was to come. I also discovered something amazing in Alejandro's vault. Among the hundreds of designs were dozens of pieces in my grandmother's measurements. Dresses, coats, gowns, all created for a woman he could never give them to. But more than that, there were designs with notes in the margins. Lucia would make this seem stronger. Or, Lucia always said silk should whisper, not shout. My grandmother hadn't just been his love. She'd been his muse, his collaborator, the invisible hand in his greatest creations. I had several pieces altered to fit me and chose one very special gown for the spring gala. The Whitmore Foundation Spring Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. 1,000 guests, $5,000 a plate, and Victoria in her element as the Queen of New York society. She'd outdone herself this year. The theme was Legacy of Giving, and she'd commissioned a video about the Whitmore family's generations of philanthropy. She'd also, once again, relegated me to a back table. Table 37 to be exact, with the photographers and the mayor's assistant's assistant. James was at table 1, of course, right next to the podium where Victoria would hold court. But this time, I didn't arrive with James. I came separately, in a car I'd hired myself, wearing a gown that no one in that room could possibly recognize because it had never been seen before. It was one of Alejandro's private collection pieces, a midnight blue creation that seemed to capture starlight in its folds. The kind of dress that didn't scream money but whispered it with every perfectly placed crystal, every hand-sewn detail. I also wore my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one Victoria had dismissed as costume jewelry. What she didn't know was that these were Tahitian black pearls, a gift from Alejandro to my grandmother on their wedding day, worth more than most people's houses. When I walked in, there was a subtle shift in the room. People who usually ignored me were suddenly looking, whispering. Fashion people, real fashion people, were recognizing the style, if not the specific dress. "Is that Herrera?" I heard someone whisper. "It can't be, those lines, but he never made that piece for public sale." I took my seat at table 37 with grace, ignoring the confused looks from the photographers who were wondering why someone in couture was sitting with them. James caught my eye from across the room, and I saw his mother notice. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she took in my appearance, clearly trying to figure out what had changed. The evening proceeded as these things always did. Cocktails, then dinner, then the inevitable speeches. Victoria took the podium as dessert was being served, resplendent in her own designer gown, diamonds dripping from her ears and throat. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone of noblesse oblige that she'd perfected over decades. Tonight, we celebrate not just giving, but legacy. The Whitmore family has been privileged to serve this city's less fortunate for over a century. She went on, detailing the family's various charitable contributions, the scholarships they'd funded, the buildings they'd donated. It was impressive, truly. $20 million over the past decade. The crowd applauded at appropriate intervals, and Victoria basked in their admiration. This year, she continued, the Whitmore family is proud to announce our largest single donation ever, $5 million to establish the Victoria Whitmore Center for Underprivileged Youth. The applause was thunderous. $5 million was indeed generous by any standard. Victoria stood there, accepting the accolades with practiced humility, her eyes sweeping the room like a queen surveying her subjects. That's when I stood up. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice clear and steady. "I'd like to make an announcement as well." The room turned to look at me, 1,000 faces registering confusion. Who was this woman interrupting Victoria Whitmore? Security started moving toward me, but I was already walking to the podium, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the sudden silence. Victoria's face went through several expressions: confusion, annoyance, then rage as she recognized me. "Emma," she hissed into the microphone, trying to play it off with a laugh. "Dear, this isn't the time." "Actually, it's the perfect time," I said, stepping up beside her. This close, I could see the moment she truly registered what I was wearing. Her eyes widened slightly. She knew fashion, knew Herrera, and knew this dress shouldn't exist. "You see," I continued, taking the microphone before she could stop me, "I've recently come into some resources of my own, and I've been so inspired by the Whitmore family's generous example." I let my eyes find James in the crowd, saw his small smile of encouragement. So inspired, in fact, that I'd like to make my own contribution to tonight's cause. Victoria tried to take back the microphone, but I stepped away, addressing the room directly. "I would like to donate $50 million to establish the Lucia Rodriguez Foundation for Immigrant Families." The silence was deafening. Then someone gasped. Then murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves. $50 million, 10 times what Victoria had just announced. "That's..." Victoria sputtered, her composed mask finally cracking. "That's impossible. You don't have..." "Oh, but I do," I said calmly. "You see, my grandmother, the seamstress from the Bronx that you've heard so much about, she left me something rather valuable. The estate of Alejandro Herrera. If I'd announced I was secretly royalty, the reaction couldn't have been more dramatic. Alejandro Herrera was a legend, a name spoken with reverence in fashion circles and beyond. Everyone knew his story. The mysterious designer who'd never married, never had children, whose empire was worth billions. "That's a lie," Harrison called out from his table, but his voice was uncertain. I pulled out my phone and showed the room the email from the Herrera board, confirming my ownership stake. 49% of Herrera International, plus his private collection, which I'm wearing a piece of tonight. I did a small turn, letting the dress catch the light. My grandmother was his wife briefly, before circumstances separated them. But he never forgot her. And he left everything to her. And through her, to me. Victoria's face had gone from red to white to an interesting shade of green. You've been lying to us, pretending to be poor." "I never pretended anything," I cut her off. "I found out 3 months ago, the same week you gave me a Target gift card for Easter while everyone else got Hermes. The same week you told that charming story about how your son had rescued me from a life of retail work." The crowd was eating this up, phones appearing despite the supposed no photography rule. This would be all over society pages by morning. "But here's the thing," I continued, addressing the room but looking directly at Victoria. "Money doesn't make someone worthy of respect. It doesn't make someone better or worse than anyone else. I was the same person when I was working at a bookstore as I am now, with billions in the bank. The only thing that's changed is your perception. I turned back to the crowd. The Lucia Rodriguez Foundation will provide full scholarships, housing assistance, and business grants to immigrant families in New York, because my grandmother believed that everyone deserves a chance to build their dreams, regardless of where they come from or what their last name is. Then I looked at Richard, who hadn't said a word, but was staring at me with something like shock. "Oh, and Richard? That brownstone you tried to buy 5 years ago? The one 3 blocks from your house? I own that now, too. I'll be moving in next month. I guess that makes us neighbors." Catherine had stood up, her face a mask of fury. "You can't just—" "I can, actually," I said pleasantly. "I can do whatever I want. Isn't that what you always told me money meant? The freedom to do whatever you want?" I stepped down from the podium and walked back through the silent room. As I passed their table, I stopped and looked at the Whitmores, Victoria, Richard, Harrison, and Catherine, the family that had made me feel small for 3 years. "You were right about one thing." "Victoria," I said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'll never be one of you. Thank God for that." The room exploded the moment I left. I could hear the chaos behind me. Voices raised in excitement, Victoria's shrill attempts to regain control, the scraping of chairs as people rushed to follow me, to get statements, to understand what they'd just witnessed. James found me outside, where I was standing by the fountain, letting the cool night air calm my racing heart. "That was," he started, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. "Too much?" I asked. "Perfect," he said, pulling me into his arms. "Absolutely perfect. Did you see Mother's face?" "Which time? When I announced the donation or when I mentioned the brownstone?" "Both. Either. God, Emma, you're magnificent." We stood there for a moment, holding each other while the chaos continued inside. Then James pulled back. "They're going to make our lives hell for this." "Let them try," I said. "What are they going to do? Disinvite me from family dinners? Treat me like I don't belong? They've already played those cards." "They could cut me off," James said quietly. "Disown me, write me out of the will." I looked at him carefully. "Would that matter to you?" He didn't hesitate. "Not even a little. I have my own money from my trust fund and my job. But more than that, Emma, watching you in there, seeing you claim your power, your worth, I'm so proud to be your husband. If my family can't see how extraordinary you are, that's their loss. Even if they never forgive us, especially then." He kissed me softly. "Come on, let's go home. Our real home. Not their guest wing or their pool house. Our apartment. Our life." We left together, walking past the photographers who'd spilled out of the gala, past the society mavens desperate for details, past everything that had once seemed so important and now felt as insubstantial as smoke. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Cinderella strikes back. Bookstore worker inherits billions. Overshadows society mother-in-law at gala. The photos were fantastic. Me at the podium in my grandmother's lover's creation, Victoria's shocked face, the crowd's amazement. The fashion blogs went crazy trying to identify my dress. And when the truth came out, that it was from Herrera's secret collection, the story got even bigger. My phone rang nonstop. Interview requests, party invitations. Suddenly everyone wanted to know Emma Whitmore née Rodriguez. The same people who'd ignored me at countless events were now desperate to be my friend. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on setting up the foundation. I hired people who actually cared about immigrant communities, not just society connections. I worked with lawyers to ensure the money would go where it was needed most. And I started going through Alejandro's designs, planning to mount an exhibition with proceeds going to the foundation. The Whitmores, predictably, tried to salvage the situation. Victoria gave an interview to the Times claiming she'd always known I was special, that she'd been mentoring me in the ways of society. Catherine suddenly remembered we were actually quite close and started telling people she'd helped me keep the secret. Harrison claimed he'd been joking all along, that it was just family banter. Richard was the only one who said nothing. did nothing. But a week after the gala, I received a handwritten note from him. "Emma, I owe you an apology, not for what happened at the gala, but for the 3 years before it. I let my wife and children treat you poorly, and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, that Victoria knew best about these things. But silence in the face of cruelty is its own form of cruelty. You deserved better from all of us, but especially from me as James's father. I should have welcomed you as a daughter. Instead, I treated you as an intrusion. Your grandmother must have been a remarkable woman to have inspired such devotion from Alejandro Herrera, but she was also remarkable for raising you. Your grace under pressure, your dignity in the face of our disgrace, these are not things money can buy. I hope, in time, you might forgive an old fool who confused wealth with worth. Richard." It was the first genuine thing any of them had said to me in 3 years. I saved the letter, but didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. James and I moved into the brownstone after a month of renovations. It was everything the Whitmore mansion wasn't: warm, welcoming, filled with light and color and life. I hung my grandmother's portrait in the living room, right next to a photo of her and Alejandro that I'd found in his papers. They looked so young, so happy, so unaware of what was coming. The first dinner party we threw was for my parents and their friends from the Bronx. My mother cooked her famous pernil, my father brought his homemade coquito, and we ate off the Herrera china that had been in storage for decades. The laughter that filled those rooms was real, genuine, nothing like the stilted conversations at Whitmore dinners. "Mija," my mother said, pulling me aside as she helped me clean up. "Your grandmother would be so proud, not because of the money. She never cared about that, but because you stood up for yourself, because you didn't let them make you small." "I almost did," I admitted. "There were times I wanted to disappear, to become whatever they wanted, just to make it stop." "But you didn't," she said firmly. "You stayed true to who you are. That's what Mama would be proud of." Later that night, as James and I sat in our library, filled with first editions we could now actually afford, including some we'd only dreamed about in that bookstore where we met, he asked me something that had clearly been on his mind. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" I thought about it for a long time. "Your father, maybe. His apology felt real, but the others, they're only sorry they got caught, sorry that the power dynamic shifted. They don't actually think they did anything wrong. And if they did, if they genuinely apologized, then I'd consider it. But James, they won't. People like your mother and siblings don't apologize. They rewrite history. In a year, Victoria will be telling people she discovered me, that she always knew I was special. Catherine will claim we were best friends. Harrison will say he was the one who encouraged our marriage." James laughed, but it was sad. "You're probably right. I know I'm right. But here's the thing. I don't need their apologies anymore. I spent 3 years needing their approval, their acceptance, their love. Now I know that was never going to happen, no matter what I did. I could have cured cancer, and your mother still would have seated me at the back table because my last name was Rodriguez. So what now? Now we live our lives. We run the foundation. We help people who are where I used to be, caught between worlds, made to feel less than because of where they come from. And we show the world that there's more than one way to have a legacy." 6 months later, the Lucia Rodriguez Foundation had helped over 300 families with scholarships, housing, and business grants. The exhibition of Alejandro's private collection raised another $20 million for the cause. And the fashion house of Herrera, with me as the largest shareholder, launched a new line called Lucia. Affordable, beautiful clothes for real women, with all profits going to immigrant causes. Victoria tried to regain her social standing by increasing her own charitable giving, but it felt hollow, performative. People remembered the gala, remembered her face when she realized the woman she'd dismissed as nothing had everything. The invitations to the best parties started going to me instead of her. The charity boards wanted me, not her. The society pages featured my events, not hers. I didn't take any pleasure in her fall. Well, maybe a little. But mostly I was focused on building something positive from my grandmother's legacy. She'd been denied her choice, forced to give up love for duty. But her sacrifice had led to my parents, to me, to this moment where I could make choices she never could. A year after the gala, I received another letter. This one was from Victoria, delivered by her personal assistant. She couldn't even face me herself. Emma, I have been informed by my son that if I wish to remain in his life, I must make amends with you. This letter is that attempt. I regret that our relationship has been strained. Perhaps I was hasty in my judgments. Your recent success has certainly proven that you are more capable than I initially assessed. If you would be amenable, I would welcome the opportunity to start fresh. After all, we are family, and family should support one another. Victoria Whitmore. I showed the letter to James, who read it and shook his head. That's not an apology. That's a negotiation. I know. What are you going to do? I thought about it for a moment, then picked up my phone and called my assistant. Please send Mrs. Victoria Whitmore a Target gift card for $25. Include a note that says, I know you like to shop there. James burst out laughing. Emma, that's cruel. No, I said, thinking of all the dinners where I'd been humiliated, all the events where I'd been hidden, all the times I'd been made to feel worthless. Cruel is making someone feel like they don't deserve to exist in your space. This is just karma. The gift card was returned, unopened, with no response. But the message was clear. The dynamics had shifted, permanently. The Whitmores could no longer pretend I was beneath them. If anything, they were now the ones looking up. Harrison tried to approach me at a charity event 6 months later. He was drunk, his usual swagger diminished. You know, he slurred, I always thought you were pretty cool. The whole Bronx thing, it was just jokes. Jokes are supposed to be funny, I said evenly. What you did was cruel. Come on, Emma, we're family. You can't hold a grudge forever. Watch me, I said, and walked away. Catherine made her attempt through social media, posting old photos of us at family events with captions like, always loved this girl, and family forever. I didn't respond, but I did notice that her follower count was dropping. Turns out, people don't like hypocrites, especially ones who get caught. The only Whitmore who never tried to reconcile was Richard, and paradoxically, he was the only one I grew to respect. He didn't make excuses or attempt false friendships. When we saw each other at events, he would nod politely, inquire after my health, and move on. He donated quietly to the foundation. Substantial amounts, anonymously, though I always knew it was him. His apology had been real, and he seemed to understand that some wounds required distance to heal. 2 years after the gala, I was pregnant with our first child. James and I were over the moon, preparing the nursery in our brownstone, arguing playfully over names. That's when Victoria made her last, desperate play. She showed up at our door, unannounced, on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was 7 months pregnant, exhausted from a foundation board meeting, and in no mood for drama. But there she was, standing on my doorstep in a Burberry trench coat, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. "May I come in?" she asked. I wanted to say no. Every fiber of my being wanted to close the door in her face, the way she'd closed so many doors to me. But I was about to become a mother myself, and something about that made me pause. 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside. She walked into my home, the one she'd never been invited to, the one that was grander than hers in every way, and I saw her take it all in. The art, the furniture, the photos of my family mixed with pictures of James and me, the life we'd built without her. "I came to talk about the baby," she said, standing stiffly in my living room. "What about the baby?" "It's my grandchild, my first grandchild. Whatever has happened between us, that child is part Whitmore." "And part Rodriguez," I reminded her. "The part you found so objectionable." She flinched. I want to be in the child's life. Why? The question seemed to surprise her. Because I'm the grandmother. No, I said firmly. That's biology, not a reason. Why should I let you near my child when you spent 3 years telling me I wasn't good enough to be near you? For the first time since I'd known her, Victoria Whitmore's eyes filled with tears. Because I was wrong. I waited. Those 3 words had cost her everything to say, but they weren't enough. I was wrong, she continued, her voice breaking. I was cruel and petty and bigoted. I saw you as a threat to the world I'd built, the legacy I thought mattered. I told myself I was protecting James, protecting our family name. But I was just a small, frightened woman who couldn't stand the thought that someone from outside our circle might actually be better than us. She sat down uninvited, suddenly looking every one of her 70 years. Do you know what it's like to realize that everything you valued your entire life is worthless? That the people you thought were beneath you are actually above you in every way that matters? Yes, I said quietly. I do, because you made me feel worthless for 3 years. She nodded, tears now flowing freely. I know what I did, and I know I can't undo it. But Emma, please, don't punish my grandchild for my sins. Let me try to be better. Let me try to be the grandmother I should have been, the mother-in-law. I stood there, 7 months pregnant, watching the woman who tormented me cry in my living room. I thought about my grandmother, about the choices she'd had to make. I thought about the child growing inside me, who would one day ask about their father's family. I thought about cycles of hurt, and whether they could ever truly be broken. If, I said slowly, and this is a big if I let you be part of this child's life, there will be conditions. Victoria looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. You will never, ever make comments about my background, my family, or my heritage. Not to me, not to James, and especially not to our child. You will treat my parents with the same respect you show your country club friends. You will not make jokes or observations about class or race or anything else you used to find so amusing. She nodded frantically. You will not try to control how we raise our child. No comments about their school, their activities, their friends. No trying to mold them into your version of a proper Whitmore. Yes, of course. And Victoria? I waited until she met my eyes. If you ever, even once, make my child feel the way you made me feel, like they're not enough, like they need to be different to be worthy of love, you will never see them again. And I have the resources now to make sure of that. I understand, she whispered. Do you? Because this isn't a negotiation. This isn't a society treaty where we pretend everything is fine for appearances. This is my child we're talking about, and I will protect them from anyone who might hurt them, including their own grandmother. Victoria stood up, composing herself. I understand, Emma, and I am sorry, truly sorry. Not because you have money now, not because the tables have turned, but because I see now what I lost. I had a daughter-in-law who was kind, intelligent, talented, and devoted to my son. And I threw that away because of prejudice and pride. She walked to the door, then turned back. Your grandmother, Lucia. She must have been an extraordinary woman to have inspired such love from Alejandro Herrera, to have raised your mother, to have shaped you. I wish I could have met her. She would have been polite to you, I said honestly. She was always polite, but she wouldn't have liked you. Victoria smiled sadly. No, I don't suppose she would have. After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time, hand on my belly, thinking about forgiveness and what we owe to family, both blood and chosen. When James came home, I told him about the visit. What do you want to do? He asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to protect our child from her completely, but part of me thinks maybe people can change. Maybe becoming a grandmother will make her different. Or maybe she'll be exactly the same, just more subtle about it. Maybe. But if we don't give her a chance, we'll never know. And our child will grow up wondering why they don't know their grandmother. James pulled me close. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. You've been right about everything else. In the end, we gave Victoria a chance. Supervised visits at first, always with James or me present. She was different, subdued, careful, almost afraid. She brought gifts that were appropriate, not ostentatious. She asked about my parents, even visited their restaurant once, though she looked hilariously out of place eating ropa vieja in the Bronx. When our daughter was born, Lucia Marie Whitmore, Victoria cried. "She's beautiful," she whispered, holding her granddaughter for the first time. "She looks like you, Emma." "She looks like my grandmother," I corrected, and Victoria nodded. "Then she'll be extraordinary." Harrison and Catherine were different stories. Harrison never changed, still making his snide comments whenever we crossed paths at family functions. He'd married Brittany, the senator's daughter, in a wedding that cost $2 million and was featured in Vogue. They divorced 18 months later when she caught him with his secretary. He came to James asking for money during the divorce, claiming his trust fund was tied up. James said no. Harrison called me a gold digger who'd turned his brother against him. Some people never learn. Catherine tried harder, but it always felt performative. She'd show up with expensive gifts for Lucia, post photos on Instagram calling her my precious niece, but never actually spent time with her. She was more interested in the appearance of being an aunt than the reality of it. When Lucia was 3, she looked at Catherine during one of her brief visits and said, "Why are you always on your phone?" Catherine had no answer. Richard, though, became a real grandfather. He would come over and read to Lucia, teaching her about architecture by building block towers, telling her stories about James as a child. He never overstepped, never assumed welcome, but slowly became part of our lives. He even started coming to Sunday dinners at my parents' restaurant, where he learned to love Dominican food and my father's stories about baseball. "You know," he told me once while watching Lucia play in the park, "I spent my whole life thinking wealth was about money and property and the right connections. But you and your family taught me that real wealth is this: love, laughter, acceptance. The Whitmores had money, the Rodriguezes have wealth." When Lucia was 5, we had our second child, a boy we named Alejandro James. Victoria was fully integrated into our lives by then, a changed woman who doted on her grandchildren and had even become friendly with my mother, bonding over knitting of all things. The woman who'd once recoiled at my grandmother's handmade blankets now spent hours learning to crochet from my mother, making little hats and booties for the grandchildren. The foundation had grown beyond my wildest dreams. We'd helped thousands of families, funded hundreds of scholarships, and created a support network for immigrants that stretched across the country. The exhibition of Alejandro's designs had become a traveling show, raising money and awareness wherever it went. And the Lucia line at Herrera had become one of the company's most successful ventures, proving that fashion could be both beautiful and accessible. One day, while organizing papers for the foundation, I found another letter from my grandmother. It had been hidden in the lining of an old jewelry box, written in her shaky hand shortly before she died. "Mi querida Emma, if you are reading this, then you have discovered the secret I kept for so long. I hope you do not judge me too harshly for the choices I made. I chose duty over love, family over passion, the known over the unknown. These were not wrong choices, just different ones than you might make. Alejandro represented a life I could have had, one of adventure and art and freedom. But choosing your grandfather gave me your mother, and she gave me you. And you, mi amor, were worth every sacrifice. I know the world has not always been kind to you. I know there are people who will try to make you feel small because of where you come from. But remember this: you come from love. You come from strength. You come from people who crossed oceans and rebuilt their lives with nothing but hope and determination. The money Alejandro left is not important. What matters is what it represents. A love that lasted 60 years despite separation. A man who never forgot the woman who taught him that true beauty comes from the soul, not the surface. Use this gift to be free, mija. Free to choose, free to love, free to be exactly who you are without apology. And remember that your worth was never determined by what others thought of you. It was always there, inside you, waiting to shine. Con amor eterno, abuela. I cried, reading it, thinking of all the paths that had led to this moment. My grandmother's sacrifice, Alejandro's devotion, my parents' hard work, James's love, even the Whitmore's cruelty. All of it had shaped me into who I was. 10 years after that fateful gala, I stood in the Metropolitan Museum again, this time as the honoree at a celebration for the Lucia Rodriguez Foundation's decade of service. The same room where Victoria had tried to diminish me now held a crowd celebrating our work. My parents were there, proud and beaming. James stood beside me, still as supportive as ever. Our children played with the other kids from foundation families, a beautiful mix of backgrounds and cultures. Victoria was there too, no longer the queen of society but something better. A woman who'd learned to value substance over status. She'd become one of the foundation's biggest supporters, not just financially but personally, volunteering at our community centers and mentoring young women who reminded her, she said, of the daughter-in-law she'd almost lost. As I took the podium to speak, I looked out at the crowd and saw my journey reflected back at me. Former scholarship recipients who were now doctors and lawyers and teachers, families who'd built businesses with our grants, young women who'd been told they weren't enough and had proved, like I had, that they were everything. 10 years ago, I began, I stood in this room as someone who'd been told repeatedly that I would never be enough, that my background was wrong, my family was wrong, that I was wrong. I believed it for longer than I care to admit. I found James's eyes in the crowd, saw his encouraging smile. But then I learned a secret that changed everything. Not the secret of inherited wealth, though that certainly helped. The real secret was this: the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who feel smallest inside. They build walls not to keep you out, but to keep themselves from seeing that there's a whole world beyond their narrow definitions of worth. My grandmother, Lucia Rodriguez, knew this secret. She lived it every day, finding dignity in work that others dismissed, finding beauty in simplicity, finding strength in community. She taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or diamonds or designer clothes. It's measured in the lives you touch, the love you share, the legacy you leave. I looked at my children, at Lucia with her grandmother's eyes, and Alejandro with his namesake's artistic soul. Tonight, we celebrate not just the foundation's work, but the proof that every person in this room represents. Proof that where you come from doesn't determine where you're going. That the circumstances of your birth don't define the possibilities of your life. That sometimes the very things others see as weaknesses are actually your greatest strengths. The applause was warm, genuine, so different from the polite clapping at those long-ago Whitmore dinners. To those who've been told you'll never be one of them, I concluded, good. Be one of us instead. Be someone who knows that worth isn't inherited or bought or granted by committee. It's inherent, inalienable, and yours from the moment you're born. Don't let anyone, no matter how rich or powerful or established, convince you otherwise. As I stepped down from the podium, Victoria approached me. She was older now, softer around the edges, both literally and figuratively. "That was beautiful, Emma," she said, and meant it. "Thank you, Victoria." She hesitated, then said, "I need to tell you something I should have said years ago." I waited. "The first time James brought you home, do you know what I actually thought? That I wasn't good enough for him." "No," she said, surprising me. "I thought you were too good for us. You had this light, this authenticity that made everything about our world seem fake and cold, and instead of learning from that, instead of letting you warm us up, I tried to put out your light. It's the biggest regret of my life. We can't change the past, Victoria. No, but we can choose the future, and I choose to spend whatever time I have left being the mother-in-law and grandmother I should have been from the start. She hugged me then, a real hug, not the air kisses of the past, and in that moment, I truly forgave her, not for her sake but for mine, for my children, for the future we were all building together. Later that night, as James and I tucked our children into bed in our brownstone, the one that had been Alejandro's gift to my grandmother's legacy, Lucia asked me a question. "Mama, why did Grandma Victoria used to be mean to you?" I'd been dreading this question, but I'd promised myself I'd be honest with my children about everything. "Because she was afraid," I said simply. "She was afraid that if she let someone different into her world, it would change things." And she was right. It did change things. But change isn't always bad. Sometimes it's exactly what we need. "But she's nice now," Alejandro piped up. "Yes, she is, because people can learn and grow and become better. That's the most important lesson. It's never too late to change, to apologize, to do better." After the children were asleep, James and I stood in our library, looking at the portrait of my grandmother and Alejandro that now hung over the fireplace. They were young, in love, unaware that life would separate them, but that their love would eventually unite families, create foundations, change lives. "Do you think they know?" James asked. "Your grandmother and Alejandro? Do you think they know what their love eventually led to?" "I hope so," I said. "I hope they know that their sacrifice wasn't in vain, that love, even interrupted, even unfulfilled, can echo through generations and create something beautiful. Like us, like our children, like the thousands of people the foundation has helped, like your mother learning to see beyond her narrow world." James pulled me close. "I love you, Emma Rodriguez Whitmore, every part of you. The girl from the Bronx, the billionaire philanthropist, the mother of my children, the woman who brought my family to its knees and then helped them stand back up. Even the part that will never fully fit into high society. Especially that part. That's the part that saved us all from becoming completely insufferable." We laughed, and the sound filled our home. The home bought with love that crossed decades, with money that came from sacrifice, with hope that transcended prejudice. As I looked around at our life, the photos of both families on the mantle, the children's art on the refrigerator worth more to me than any masterpiece, the mixture of inherited antiques and items from my parents' home, I realized that this was what my grandmother had really left me. Not just money, but the chance to build bridges where there had been walls, to create family from fragments, to prove that love is always stronger than fear. The Whitmores had been right about one thing all those years ago. I would never be one of them. I was something more. I was a Rodriguez and a Whitmore, a bridge between worlds, proof that the American dream isn't about becoming someone else, but about becoming more fully yourself. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. Looking back now, I sometimes think about that girl who sat at table 37, invisible and dismissed, believing she would never be enough. I wish I could tell her that the very things they mocked, her background, her family, her authenticity, would become her greatest strengths. That the grandmother she mourned had left her more than memories. She'd left her a legacy that would change everything, but maybe she needed to go through those 3 years of pain to appreciate what came after. Maybe she needed to know what it felt like to be deemed worthless, to understand that worth isn't something others can give or take away. Maybe every snub, every insult, every moment of feeling small was preparing her for the moment when she would stand tall and refuse to shrink herself for anyone's comfort. The Lucia Rodriguez Foundation continues to grow. We've expanded internationally now, helping immigrant families in 12 countries. The Herrera Lucia line has become a movement, proving that fashion can be both accessible and exquisite. My children are growing up bilingual, bicultural, proud of both sides of their heritage. They know their worth isn't tied to their bank account or their bloodline, but to their character and their choices. Victoria lived to see both children graduate from high school. At Lucia's graduation, she stood between my mother and me, tears streaming down her face as her granddaughter gave the valedictorian speech in both English and Spanish. "I was so wrong," she whispered to me. "So stupidly, blindly wrong. Thank you for giving me the chance to be right." She passed away peacefully 2 years later, having spent her final years working with the foundation, using her society connections for good, and teaching my mother how to play bridge while my mother taught her how to make sofrito. At her funeral, the church was packed with an unusual mix. Society matrons sitting next to immigrant families, CEOs next to shop owners, all united in remembering a woman who'd learned to change. In her will, she left everything to the foundation except for one thing: a letter for me. My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I can finally say what I've wanted to say for years without my pride getting in the way. You saved us. You saved James from becoming a shallow copy of his father. You saved Richard from dying without knowing what real family meant. You saved Harrison and Catherine from thinking their worth came from their name, though they may still be learning that lesson. And you saved me from dying as the same small, frightened woman I'd been my whole life. When you stood at that podium 10 years ago and revealed your inheritance, you didn't just reveal money. You revealed our poverty, the poverty of spirit that made us think we were better than others simply because of where we were born. You showed us that we were the ones who weren't enough. Not enough in compassion, not enough in grace, not enough in understanding. Your grandmother Lucia must have been a remarkable woman to have raised such a remarkable granddaughter. I hope that somewhere she and Alejandro are together, watching what their love created, knowing that it was all worth it. Thank you for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for letting me know my grandchildren. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change. With all my love and respect, Victoria P.S. I've been practicing making your mother's flan recipe. I think I finally got it right. The secret, as she told me 1,000 times, is patience and love. 2 things I had to learn far too late, but better late than never. I keep that letter in my desk, next to my grandmother's letter, next to the photo of her and Alejandro. 3 generations of love and loss and redemption. Proof that families aren't just born, but built, sometimes from the most unlikely materials. James and I are still together, stronger than ever. He runs a venture capital firm focused on immigrant-owned businesses. He jokes that he's still living off his wife's money, but the truth is he's built something remarkable of his own, separate from both the Whitmore fortune and mine. He's proven that he's more than his name, just as I proved I was more than mine. Our children are teenagers now, navigating their own path between worlds. Lucia wants to be a doctor, to help communities like the one I came from. Alejandro is an artist, his work already showing in galleries, the creative gene from his namesake flowing through his veins. They know their story, all of it, the good and the bad, the struggles and the triumphs. They know that privilege is a responsibility, not a right, and that wealth means nothing if it's not used to lift others. Sometimes I drive through the old neighborhood in the Bronx, past the bookstore where James and I met, now a chain pharmacy, sadly, past my parents' restaurant, still thriving, now run by my cousin, past the apartment where I grew up dreaming of something more. I think about how desperately I wanted to escape, to be someone else, to fit into a world that seemed so golden from the outside. Now I know that the world I was trying to enter was the one that needed escaping. The Whitmores, trapped in their gilded cage, were the ones who weren't free. They were prisoners of their own expectations, their own prejudices, their own fear of anything different. I didn't need to become one of them. They needed to become more like us. The dreamers, the strivers, the ones who knew that family was about more than blood and worth, was about more than wealth. The Brownstone is hosting another dinner party tonight. My parents are coming, bringing their famous arroz con gandules. Richard is bringing wine from a vineyard he invested in, run by a Mexican immigrant family we helped through the foundation. Some of the scholarship recipients will be there, sharing their successes. Even Harrison might show up, though he's still learning how to exist in a world where he's not automatically the most important person in the room. As I prepare for the evening, I catch my reflection in the mirror. The same mirror that once belonged to Alejandro, that he perhaps looked in thinking of my grandmother. I see her in my face, in my determination, in my refusal to let anyone make me feel less than. I see my mother's strength, my father's joy. I see the girl who was told she'd never be one of them, and the woman who proved that was the best thing that could have happened. "You'll never be one of us," Victoria had said all those years ago. She was right. I became something better. I became myself. And that, more than any inheritance, was my grandmother's greatest gift. The knowledge that we don't need to be one of them to be worthy. We just need to be one of us, the ones who know that love transcends time, that worth transcends wealth, and that the best revenge against those who try to make us small is to become so big that we can lift others up with us. The doorbell rings. The party is beginning. Our home fills with voices in multiple languages, with laughter that's genuine, with the smell of food made with love rather than presented for show. This is wealth. This is legacy. This is what happens when you stop trying to be one of them and realize that being one of us, the outsiders, the strivers, the ones who weren't supposed to make it, is the greatest privilege of all. My grandmother and Alejandro never got their happy ending, not in the traditional sense. But their love story didn't end with them. It continued through me, through my children, through every family we help and every barrier we break. Love like theirs doesn't die. It transforms, transcends, and ultimately triumphs. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, I like to think they're watching, together at last, knowing that their sacrifice became our salvation, their loss became our gain, and their love, that impossible, interrupted, eternal love, became the foundation for everything we've built. The Whitmores were wrong about so many things, but they were right about one. I'll never be one of them. Thank God for that.